The first of Moses' excuses for not going to speak to Pharaoh is given to us here in this passage. It was read for us there in Exodus chapter 4. And Moses said, "What if they will not believe me or listen to what I say? For they may say, the Lord has not appeared to you." The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A staff." It occurs to me that this time of the year people set goals. Some call them resolutions. Some call them other things. I think many times instead of the true meaning of that, they look at it and they make intentions. I have intention to do whatever it is. They won't say it like that, but that's what it becomes because they fall by the wayside. And later they may say, that's what I intended to do. That's what I wanted to do, but I failed to do it. Moses did not think he was the guy. What do I say? What do I say if they say, well, how do we know God appeared to you? And God is very wise as always, and he says to him, "What's in your hand?" Now, when you think about what could God have said to him, a number of things God could have said. But he showed Moses, through his power, you already have what you need. Through the power of God, we already have what we need. And so, I've asked the question of us, of you and I, what is in your hand? Throughout the Bible, people are given things to use for the glory of God. Moses was given that rod. David was given the sling. The poor widow had 2 mites. Nadab and Abihu, strange fire. Solomon had a kingdom at his disposal. The servant had a talent. The rich man had great wealth. Rahab, a scarlet string. Some used them for the glory of God, and some used the things in their hand not so much for the glory of God, but to show their rejection of God. What are we doing with what God has given us, with what is in our hands? There are some things that all of us possess, and that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at 5 things that all of us possess, and that's what we're going to focus on. Because you may say, well, I don't have what some people have. I don't have that. And so I can't really do that because I don't have that. And so that's your excuse, as Moses gave an excuse. Well, what do I say? But I would suggest to you that God is asking you, what is in your hand? First of all, each of us have a life that God has given us. If you're here this morning, you obviously are alive. You have been living a life on this earth. The question, of course, becomes, what are you doing with that life? Are you using it for the glory of God? Look carefully at James chapter 4, beginning in verse 13, where the Bible says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, We will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. We have a life. How are we living it? Are we living it to the glory of God, to the glory of Christ? Are we using our life as a self-seeking thing, pleasing only ourselves, maybe a few people that are around us? A lot of times we will use this passage to talk about how short life is, and certainly I've done that in the past as well, as many preachers have. And certainly we can get that from this context. But today I want you to look at this and understand another point that James is making to us, the inspired writer is making to us, is use your life to the glory of God. And understand that God is the one that should be in control. And when you make plans in your life, you make set goals for your life, you include God. And you understand that God needs to be at the forefront. That idea of if the Lord wills is a whole nother lesson and a whole nother discussion. What does he mean by that? What is the will of God? Let me suggest to you that God allows things to happen in our life and allows us to have opportunities. But we still have a choice in whether or not we take advantage of those opportunities. But certainly we need to bring God into it. I've mentioned before, and one day I might have done a lesson on this in the past, that my memory fails me this morning, but there are things that affect our behavior, and one of those things is the goals you set for yourself. Whether you think you have goals or not, you do. Even if you say, well, I haven't made any goals for this year, that's a goal in itself, not to have any goals. But goals drive you. Whatever your goal is, and it may be small, it may be very minute, but it's a goal that you have. I'm glad to see so many here this morning because you had that as a goal to attend worship service. And certainly that's a worthy thing to do. God instructs us to meet and assemble each Lord's Day. But we need to set other goals and be living our lives in such a way that God is glorified. Understanding that this world is not our home. 1 John 2:17, the world is passing away and also its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever. I must know what the will of God is, and then I must go about living that will. Doing what God would have me to do. Doing the things that show that I put God first. I have a life. You have a life. What are you doing with that life? Another thing that all of us possess is a body. If we have a life on this earth, then we have been given a body from God. Genesis 1, beginning in verse 26, says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. God has given you a body. Now, I'm not going to belabor the point, but if you've been here for any length of time, this time last year, I did not look like I do now. And I made a commitment because of health reasons, but I made a commitment to be healthier. And I'm not quite where I want to be yet, but I am well on the way to being there. You also should look at your health. Because we have been given something that should be precious to us, our body. And I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes here. But I want to express to you that I love each and every one of you. Every one of you, I love you as God would have me to love you. And I want to spend many years with many of you. And the more we concentrate on being healthy, the longer we get to serve the God of heaven. It's not for selfish reasons that we should do what we need to do to be healthy, but to the glory of God. We should be good stewards with everything that God has given us, including our physical body. And I am guilty of not doing that for many, many years. And I regret that, as I've expressed in the past. In the book of Daniel, chapter 1, we look at a young man who very easily could have partaken of things that he knew were harmful to his body. But he had access to them. But he chose not to do that, but rather to glorify God in his body by not partaking of the things that he knew were harmful to him. Daniel 1, verses 8 and 9. But Daniel made up his mind. Isn't that what a resolution is? Isn't that what setting a goal is? You make up your mind. But then, as we all know, it takes commitment to do that. That he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank, so he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and the compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. I would suggest to you that God gives us favor and has provided for us a way to be healthy in this life, a way to keep our bodies functioning at a optimal level. And the healthier we are, the more we can do for God, for the glory of God. Then we can say like the psalmist did in Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. We also, every one of us, have time. Time is something that each of us have. And many of us will say many times, boy, I wish I had more time. I wish I had time to do whatever it is. We crave that. We understand, and the older one becomes in this life, the more you understand how precious time is. And certainly we can't get back time. We can't make more time, but we can be more time conscious. And we can make the most of the time that we have on this earth. We must always remember where time came from. Genesis 1:14, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. God instituted time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, time began for us, for mankind. God brought time into existence, and one day God will end time as we know it. And then we will simply be existing as God has always, eternally existed. But right now, we have time, and we must be using it wisely. What is in your hand? Time. Your time. Today. Time that you had yesterday, what did you use it for? Time you had this previous year. Have you looked back and reflected on the year? A lot of times people will do that. You may not remember, but at the beginning of last year, I gave a lesson on how we needed to seize the year 2016. We needed to rejoice. We needed to remember the Lord. Did you do that? Let me ask you that. Did you seize 2016 and do all that you could for God? Or do you have things that you wish you would have done better? Well, you now have time to do that. Time to improve. Let me suggest to you that don't make resolutions just on this time of the year, but rather look at your life from the Christian point of view. From the way God looks at it, He desires for us to renew ourselves, recommit ourselves each and every day. Each and every day. And it's something that we should do. Thank God for the time that you have. Thank Him for the day. This is the day which the Lord has made. I will be glad and rejoice in it. Psalm 118 and verse 24. Take time to put God first each and every day. Take time to study His Word. Take time to pray. And I say take time, but it's certainly, we could change that to make time. The things that are really important to you, you seem to find time for those things. Is God important to you? Peter said this in 1 Peter 4, 1 and 2, "Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose. Because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God." What are you doing with your time? We all have it. What is that in your hand? One of those things is time. Next, we all have talent, whether that's money or abilities, however you want to look at that word. We all have them. We all have different things that we can do. We all have different things that we are good at. Are we using those things? What is that in your hand? Your talents, the ability that you have to support the work, to give to the church, to give of your abilities to glorify God in some way. What are you doing with those? We're going to read this entire parable that Jesus gives, beginning in Matthew 25, verse 14. Read along with me, if you will. Matthew 25, beginning in verse 14. Listen carefully to what Jesus says. "For it is just like a man about to go on a journey, who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability. And he went on his journey. Immediately the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 talents and brought 5 more talents. His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Also the one who received the 2 talents came up and said, 'Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one who also had received the 1 talent came up and said, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid and went away, hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours.' But his master answered and said to him, 'You wicked, lazy slave. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" We might read this and think, man, that's harsh. The one that he was just a little bit afraid. That's harsh. If God had accepted the first excuse from Moses, Exodus would read a lot differently, wouldn't it? If God had said, you know what, Moses, you're right. You don't understand. You're not worthy of leading the children of Israel. I'm going to go get somebody else. But God knew that Moses was the guy. He was the man that was to lead his people. Moses was the one God chose, and he showed Moses time and again. Each time Moses would give, in his mind, a reason, but really an excuse, God would show him, what's in your hand? Let me suggest to you that all of us need to be that 5-talent and that 2-talent person. Each and every one of us need to take the things that God has given us, the things that are in our hands, and use them to the glory of God, to the very best of our ability. And when we fail to do that, we need to remember what happened to that 1-talent man. We need to understand not to be afraid, but to be bold in our service to God and to Christ. We need to remember that God has given us things that we possess, and we can use them for His glory day and every day, not just on a certain day or not just a certain time of the year, but every single day. Make a commitment to God and to use the things that He has given us. Colossians 3:17, the Apostle Paul, writing to those Christians, says, whatever you do. Let's stop there for a second. Sometimes we read these statements and we go over them, and we want to go on into the passage because there's so much there. But whatever you do, it really does not leave anything out. And I suggest to you that if you're doing something that you know is against the God of heaven, go back to and understand that I've got to stop that. And if there's something that I'm lacking that I haven't started doing that I know that I should, remember that passage in James. To him that knows to do good and does not do it, what is it? It's sin. Man, that's an ugly word sometimes. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to do things that are against God. I don't want to sin. But we don't look at it as sin. But when we give excuses and say, God, I can't do it, who's going to believe me? Who's going to accept your word? Who's going to go on? The list goes on and on. We need to remember, God says, what's in your hand? And use it. Whatever you do, in word or deed, do all. There's another word of totality. All in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through Him to God the Father. Do it and pray about it. That's what Paul's saying. Whatever you do it as if you're doing it for God, for Jesus, because you should be doing it for Him. That's following Him. That's using the things that God has given you in the proper way. Doing good because you know that's what you need to be doing. Next, we all have a soul. Whether you recognize that, whether you think about it, or whether you repress that idea, you have one. And just like the 5-talent and the 1-talent man, someday you're going to give an account. Someday your soul is in the balance of where it will spend eternity, where you will spend eternity. It is a part of you. It is a part of you that will live forever. It will either live forever in glory and honor and in the majesty of heaven, or it will be destroyed forever and ever. And you'll spend your existence will be with the devil and his angels. Now, it's pretty easy to say where you want to spend eternity. It's pretty easy to say it, and it's another matter to live it. What's in your hand? Your soul's eternal destination. your hand. God would prefer to reward you as he did the 5-talent and the 2-talent person. That's what he would prefer. But it's your choice. It's yours to decide. It's yours to decide where you spend eternity. But you decide it each and every day. Each and every day by your actions. Look what the Hebrew writer records for us in chapter 10, beginning in verse 37. For yet in a very little while he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. Our soul should be our most precious possession. I should care about my soul more than I do anything else. And if I do, if I understand the seriousness of that, then I'm going to serve the God of heaven. I'm going to take what's in my hand and do what God would have me to do. And you will do the same when you understand fully the seriousness of your soul's destination. Because once you understand your own soul's destination and the seriousness of it, you're going to understand that everyone here this morning has a soul. Everyone out in the parking lot of Walmart out here has a soul. Everyone I come in contact with today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day has a soul. Jesus said these words in Matthew 16. Listen to him. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And then these words I know you've heard before. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What's in your hand? Your soul's destiny. Moses was afraid. Sometimes we are too. But let me suggest to you today to stop doing that. Stop being afraid of standing up for God. Stop being afraid of standing up for Christ. Stop being afraid of living the Christian life. And understand the seriousness of your life, the shortness of your time. Understand that God has given you what you need. What is that in your hand? What is that in your hand? It's your life. It's your body. It's your time. It's your talent. It's your soul. Use it to the glory of God. Use it to bring others to Him. Use it to tell others that they have a life. Use it to reach the goal of heaven. God asked Moses, what is that in your hand? At judgment, we essentially are going to be asked the same thing. What did you do with the things in your hand? What are you doing with what God has blessed you with? What are you going to do with those things? The challenge is for all of us to use what we have for His glory and His glory only. If you're not a Christian this morning, your soul's destiny is in danger. There's no other way to put it. It is in danger of hell fire. We don't like to talk about the negative aspects of the judgment. It's not fun to talk about people being destroyed eternally. We don't enjoy that. We don't enjoy thinking about that. But if we're not thinking about that, when are we going to think about it? If we're not thinking about that today and every day, that I do not want to spend eternity with the devil and his angels, but rather I want to spend eternity with God and his Son and the angels of heaven. If I don't think about that every day, when it's going to be too late one day. And then I'm going to stand before the God of heaven and he's going to say, what you do with what's in your hand? What will you be able to say? I hid the things I could do, Father. I knew there was more I could do, but I hid them. Because you're a vengeful God. Are you going to say, I did my very best, and I know it wasn't good enough? I did my very best, and it's still not going to be good enough. But with the blood of Christ, God will look at you. Jesus will look at you and say, enter in. Wow. What's in your hand? And what are you doing with it? If you need help, if you need to respond to the gospel message, if you need the prayers of the church to recommit your life to God, using the things in your hand for his glory, come now while we stand and sing. 'Cause he gave his everything.